Give us this day our daily bread.
Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world.
Do what you do. Even though this is the last reflection we're going to do, it's the one that Jesus says was the most important. When Jesus told us about the journeys that he thought were the basics, the thing God wanted most, he said, first, learn to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. What are some of the blocks to that? One of the biggest blocks, strangely, is the word commandments. Because, you know, there are people who wanted a few years ago to act like they were the 10 suggestions that you could keep or not. And God said, no, these are not suggestions. If they're suggestions, you're like everybody else, you're probably not going to listen to them. I'm saying they're commands. But when we humans use the word command, the first thing we think of is control. We're being controlled. I command you to do that. I'm controlling your life. Well, that's the opposite of what's really happening. You know, the commandments are an invitation to a whole different way of structuring a society. The 10 Commandments originally were not even thought of for just individuals. Yes, it's individuals who keep them and make up the society. But what God was saying is if these commands are kept by the community, you will prosper. And if you don't keep these, you will not prosper. And in our country at the moment, where many people have stopped living the commandments, we see exactly the result that happens. So just the word commandment turns many people off. And I'm not suggesting that we move to a different word. Let's keep the word commandments, but somehow we need to put a disclaimer that commandments are made to call us to happiness, to get us toward freedom and happiness, and following our own way of doing things, eating from the tree of good and evil, if we talk about Adam and Eve, trying to decide for ourselves what'll make us happy and what'll make us free. God said, that's the only thing. I give you everything in the world. I give you the whole garden, all the trees. The only thing I don't want you to do is don't eat from that tree. Don't try to decide for yourself what's going to lead you to happiness or not. I'm your creator, and I love you, and I care about you, and it makes a difference to me. I want you happy. Therefore, I give you these commandments. The Beatitudes are the same thing. It's Jesus taking those commandments and making them internal. These are things that are going to lead you to happiness. And then he told us just straightforwardly, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I came that my life would be in you and that you would live life abundantly. I came that my joy would be in you and that your joy would be full. God's whole agenda, if we want to put it that way, is happiness in his family if we listen to him. One of the other blocks to loving God are some of our strange images of God. And some of these come from childhood. One of the most common childhood images of God is the resident policeman. God is a resident policeman who lives in the back of my head, and he sees everything I do, even more than Santa Claus does. He sees everything I do, good or bad, and he's watching, and he's keeping a list. And we were even told in grade school about this list, that at the end of your life, if you've got more things on this good list than you have on the bad list, well, you got it made. God doesn't have a list. God does not have a list. Saint Teresa of Lisieux said, God is not as perfect as everybody thinks he is. He has two faults. He has a bad memory, and he can't count. She had a much better insight into God. He's not a resident policeman. Another block to learning to love God is the original sin. The original sin is a sin of distrust. We believe the father of lies rather than the father of truth. The father of lies said, do you really think if you eat from that tree that you're going to die? You're going to be like God. You're going to decide for yourself what's good and what's bad. Well, we've been doing that ever since. We've been trying to decide what's good for us, what's bad for us. And we run the bus in the ditch because we don't drive the bus very well. We've got to let God drive the bus. Well, that original sin is something we're born with, especially when people give us that impression that whoever this God is and these people who work for him in religion, that they want to control us. And that's a very common feeling, but it's not the truth. One of the things that most keeps us from loving and trusting God is when bad things happen. So many people who have always trusted God and always felt they loved God, at a certain point, their mom dies after they really prayed that she wouldn't. Their child dies, and people even tell them things like God had a plan, and they're saying, can't an all-wise God come up with a better plan than this? To give me a 4-year-old who's wonderful and beautiful, and the 4-year-old dies of cancer? That jars a lot of people's ability to trust or completely give their heart to their God. They're just not sure what to do with that. And it's a difficult question, because when we talk about God being all-powerful, and that's certainly part of our creed, the thought, though, is if he's all-powerful, he can control everything. So he either caused it or he allowed it. And either one of those doesn't sit very well when it's your 4-year-old that dies. And we have to work with that. And much of my work is working with that with people. To talk about the fact that I don't understand the mystery of God either. But God doesn't have plans for us. He has a plan for the human family, for the earth. But he has dreams for us. Plans are controlling. You know, if your parents said to you when you were going into high school, you're going into high school here, you're going to college here, you're going to take this for your major, you're going to marry this person, you're going to have this amount of children. You're going to say, wait a minute, this is my life. People who love us don't plan for us, they dream for us. God has dreams for us to live till we're 95 and holding our great-grandchildren in our arms. And then we say, well, then what happened An explanation that I try to give to people sometimes is any of you who are parents know that love is the most powerful thing in the world. Love changes your life when you meet the person you love. Love can bring life into the world. Love makes all the difference in your life. You can have the nicest home, the nicest cars, wonderful kids, and your spouse dies, and none of it makes any difference. It's just like the center of me is gone. Part of me went with my spouse. We became one, like we said at marriage, and that person's gone. Well, love is the most powerful thing we know in the world. It can change history. It can change people's lives. But we also know at the same time, love is all powerless. We can't control the people we love. We can't dominate the people we love. Love is very powerless. When we love someone, we become extremely vulnerable. If God is perfect love, then in some strange way, God is all powerful and has rendered himself all powerless by his love for us. I don't pretend to be able to explain that. I just know it's true of all love, and if he is perfect love, it at least pokes at the mystery of God, and it seems to help people. You obviously can't say that to them at the wake. Nothing helps. But 3 months later, sitting down while they're grieving and reflecting, it sometimes can. One of the other things that is a real problem for learning to love God is the difference between the God of philosophy and the God of Jesus. You know, philosophers argued for years about God. Plato and Aristotle and all the Greek philosophers and all the other philosophers. And at one point in history, God just said, let me get one word in edgewise. And that word was Jesus. His word was Jesus. And Jesus said, I came so that if you see me, you see the Father. The God of Jesus is so different than the God of philosophy. The God of the Greek philosophers, you know, lived up there somewhere and they sat on their thrones and they wanted to be served and they wanted to dominate everything. The God of Jesus, if Jesus is the perfect image of God, is a God who's humble, a God who's quiet, a God who won't break a bruised reed, who won't put out a smoldering wick, a God who is gentle, a God who serves, a God who's more interested in what we do to each other than what we do to him. That God of Jesus is so different from the God of philosophy. And when God said, let me just get one word in edgewise, and he did, Jesus. Jesus wasn't gone 50 years, and we were back to the God of philosophy. And we're still talking about the God of philosophy when we talk about God half the time. That is not our God. We do not just believe in God. We believe in the God of Jesus. And the God of Jesus is so different. Humble, quiet, serving, putting himself last, vulnerable. That's a very much more easy God to love. When I can't pray, if there's a period, and we all hit those, for a week or two where I can't pray, nobody's home, nothing happens. If I come back and picture the humility of God, that the God who created all the heavens and the earth, the galaxies and the expanding universe, and all the greatness of God, that this God is like Jesus, that he is very humble. Suddenly I can pray to him again, because he's not as powerful. He still is, but I don't focus on that. I focus on his humility, and that makes all the difference in the world. What's another reason that we have trouble with learning to love God? One of the ways is that mix-up between fear and awe and wonder. You know, as we moved away from the fear of God, meaning being afraid of him, to the fear of God that stands in awe and wonder at his humility, his kindness, his gentleness, his forgiveness, his mercy. If we can make that journey, that really helps us. But if we can't, if we get stuck in that fear, there's so many people will come to confession and say, Father, I was at confession 3 weeks ago, but the reason I'm back is I missed Mass last Sunday. And I know I was sick, and I was really sick, and I couldn't get out of bed, and I knew I couldn't get here. But I just feel better if I come and tell you. They know it wasn't a mortal sin. They know they didn't sin, they were sick. But some little kid in them is saying, I gotta go tell that. I gotta get forgiven that. And they won't say, otherwise God will get me, but that's somewhere back there. What if I died? There's still that distrust that he really understands us. One of the other problems is anger at God. A lot of people don't feel they can get angry at God. If you don't, read Psalm 73 and read a good translation of it that really gives you the picture of it. This man is saying in Psalm 73, I've been doing everything right all my life, and nothing turns out right for me. But that smart aleck with his big mouth is blaspheming and running around town and breaking every commandment, and he's always doing better. Every week he's doing better. And the guy says, I think I'm about done with you, God. You're taking care of that big mouth, that loud mouth, and I'm trying to do my best, and you don't do anything for me. Nothing works. And then he comes to his senses, and he says, all right, God, I know I'm acting like a mule with a bit in my mouth. I know that without you, I have no future. Without you, I'm lost. And he comes back to him. But the whole first half of the psalm, he's just really ticked at God, but he has the courage to tell him. That's the gift. The gift is the honesty. And that's where we've got to go. That's what helps. The thing that gets us on our way to loving God, first of all, is naming the stuff we just named. Is there anything in my life as I look at it, any of these blocks that are keeping me from really loving God? that I don't trust him or that I do fear him too much in the wrong sense, or that something's happened in my life that I've blamed him for, or whatever the cause might be. But when we begin to pray, God wants the same honesty a husband or wife wants. The only way to repair a problem in a relationship is honesty. Sit down and talk about it. If we can sit down with God and say, God, I am so angry at you, I don't want to look at you. I don't want you around. And for the last 2 weeks, I just distanced myself from you. I didn't talk to you. I went on with other stuff and never came near you. But I'm back. All right, but I need to tell you, I'm angry. He has no problem with that. If who've had little kids, you know, when your kids are 4 or 5 years old and they come in the kitchen and they stamp their feet, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I'm leaving home. And they leave home and they go to the corner and they sit on the corner till it gets dark or they get hungry and then they come back home. Were you angry back at them? No, they just didn't understand. Well, God knows that the little kid in us gets really mad at him. And as long as we tell him, stamp our feet and holler at him, and go sit on the corner till it's dark and come back, he's okay with that. He doesn't have any problem with that. He's not going to hit us with lightning. If he were, I'd have been gone a long time ago. He'd have had me for sure. But that's a significant part. The other is our prayer has to move away from 3 different ways of praying. Some of you have heard me talk about that dialogue is the only way to grow. And whether it's in our relationships with ourself, through journaling and reflection, whether it's dialogue with other people as we try to learn to love others, or whether it's dialogue with God, honest prayer and dialogue works. But other kinds of prayer don't. There's a kind of prayer when we don't want to really dialogue honestly with God, where we try to control him. And the way we control him is bargaining. God, if you get me out of this mess, I'll pray a rosary every day of my life for the rest of my life. Or I'll never drink again, or I'll never smoke again. And God just smiles. God doesn't do bargains because he doesn't like to be controlled. The other way we try to avoid honest relationships with God and prayer is that we try to appease him. I'll sacrifice things if I sacrifice enough. And that started in the Old Testament. God, we need rain, so we'll give you some of our crops. But it still didn't rain. So then they give them the best crops, and it still doesn't rain. Then they give them a goat, and it still doesn't rain. And they ended up giving them their firstborn. And they would give their pagan gods their firstborn son and kill him. That's probably why Abraham, who lived in an area where people did that with the pagan gods, thought God was asking that of him. And God stops him and says, Abraham, I would not ask anybody to give up their own son except myself. He asked himself to give up his own son, but he wouldn't ask that of anyone else. The third, if we can't quite bargain to control him, or we can't appease him through sacrifices. And he told us, quit stinking up the heavens with all your bulls and heifers and sacrifices. He says, I don't want sacrifice, I want obedience. I want trust. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. It wasn't that he was bloody and painful. Yes, that's how it happened. But it was his act of obedience, his act of trust in his God. But the third way is to just withdraw from God. I can't control you. I can't bargain with you. I can't appease you through sacrifices. I'll just walk away. I just won't pray so much. I just will quit praying. I'll amuse myself with other stuff. And many people choose that method. What's our goal? I was on a retreat recently, and the retreat master asked me a very important question about whether God was my roommate or my spouse. And I said, what? And he said, well, I had a roommate in college, and, we'd see each other in the morning, how you doing? I'd see him in the evening, how you doing? Good day, yep. But we went our own ways. He said, with a spouse, you check in differently. You really care where your spouse is. You care what happened. It makes a difference. They are the center of your life. They make a difference in your life. They're the one person who fully understands you. And I laughed with him, and I said, can I add neighbor? That sometimes God is my neighbor, and sometimes I just wave at him and say hello, but keep going with my life. Sometimes he is my roommate. Yeah, we're in the same area. I say hello, we talk, but not much more. But God's dream is that he marries the human family, and that he be the spouse for all of us, and that he be for us what a spouse is for their spouse. The center, the meaning, the heart of everything. That's the goal. That's where he wants us to get. So whether we learn that in learning to pray, whether we learn it in private prayer, whether we learn it in our communal prayer as a community, wherever it is, if we examine all those things that block us from the love of God, and then we commit ourselves to really talking with him, and really being in conversation, and really learn not to bargain or appease or withdraw, but to keep talking honestly, consistently, caringly. Then when we do that, and we gradually do that, then through a lifetime, he becomes for us what we want him to be. Not just an acquaintance, not just a neighbor, not just a roommate, but everything a husband and wife is for each other, the best of friends, the one who understands and loves us completely. That's the end of the journey. Augustine was right. Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Let's keep trying. Thank you.